Hi, my name is Joshua Graff, and I will be the moderator for this presentation. The topic is zero tolerance policies in school ethical? Presenting the side stating that zero tolerance policy in school is ethical is Ashley Landry.
Hi.
Presenting the side that states that it is unethical is Mariah Avery.
Hi.
Before the debate commences, I need to clarify what zero tolerance actually is. Zero tolerance refers to the concept that certain types of disciplinary offenses will not be tolerated and automatically result in either suspension or expulsion. To go further to clarify, suspension is defined as removing students from the classroom for 1 day or more, in or out of school, because of a rule violation. And then expulsion will be defined as any involuntary disenrollment from school based on a rule violation. Now, to give the audience more background on where zero tolerance policy comes from, zero tolerance policies came from the aftermath of the Columbine shooting, which was the first mass shooting done by students on April 20th, 1999 in Colorado. The students murdered 12 other students and one teacher. The federal government mandated that any school receiving government funding needed to expel a student for bringing any kind of weapon to school. This was known as the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994. Now, to start the debate, Ashley will be presenting her first point. Ashley?
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. I am Ashley, and I am pro zero tolerance. The first point that I would like to make is that zero tolerance is an explicit written disciplinary practice that ensures that the practices are carried out equally across student populations. And by having this documentation, it means that all students are treated the same. It is important to remember that consistency is key, and it is good to remain consistent among all students, giving no one special treatment. We all know that special treatment leaves room for error and raises lots of questions that are difficult. The contingencies are written behavior and are considered verbal behavior. When rules like this are implemented, there is positive change in behavior. And I would now like to open the floor.
Mariah, is there a rebuttal?
There is. Thank you, Josh. The Khan's first rebuttal to the point by Pro is that African Americans and those in self-contained classrooms experience zero tolerance very differently than their white peers. There was a report done by the Office of the President, 2016, and that details just how differently they experience zero tolerance. I have two visuals to show that Josh is going to pull up for me. The first details the racial differences. It's split up by race and by sex. And then the pair to that visual shows how students in self-contained classrooms are experiencing zero tolerance. So I'm going to bounce it to you, Josh, to show that.
All right. This first graph is the percentage of students receiving one or more out-of-school suspensions by either race, ethnicity, and sex. As Mariah just stated, it is clear that Black or African Americans receive the highest rate in both sexes, boys at 18% and girls at 10%. Then, as she also mentioned, we have another chart here that shows that students with disabilities are receiving one or more out-of-school suspensions by race, ethnicity, and sex. As you can see, again, the highest rate for both sexes are Black or African Americans with a disability. Mariah?
I'd like to I'd open the floor.
Thanks,
Ashley, do you have a response?
Yes, I do. I'd like to state another point about zero tolerance and the policies. The policies ensure continuity among schools in a united front per se. So this prepares students for the real world. For instance, when an employee shows up late for work, the employer will most likely have the same consequence for all employees, such as being fired without pay. Another case is speeding. So when caught violating the speed limit, the consequence is the same for all, and that is a speeding ticket. There is mandatory punishment regardless of the context or the history of the student. The level of continuity leads to the desired behavior. And I open the floor.
Mariah, do you have a rebuttal?
I do. Thank you, Josh. I'd like to say that behavior drift has caused schools to vary from the original plan of zero tolerance and punish children for mild misbehavior, such as insubordination or disruptive behavior. And these can be interpreted very subjectively and show significant bias, as we see in the Shikba et al. Article in 2006 titled, "Are Zero Tolerance Policies Effective in Schools?" A report by the American Psychological Association Task Force. The breakdown for that's on page 63 of that report. There's also another figure that Josh is going to pull up that shows the same pattern. It took records from racially and socioeconomically diverse school districts in different parts of the southern United States, and it took records from over 40,000 youth. The study was commissioned by the Children's Law Center, and its goal was to investigate different racial discipline disparities that they were seeing, that we were talking about before. And the bar graph that you're going to see depicts offenses resulting in out-of-school suspension. What you're going to see is a lot of the suspensions are from disruptive behavior, up to 41%, followed by truancy, fighting, at 22 and 20% respectively. And the most serious violations, specifically possession of a weapon. Keep in mind, that was the original design of the of this Gun-Free Schools Act, was to expel or suspend students who bring weapons to school, and that's at at 1% on the graph. So it's actually the least prosecuted offense in schools currently. And so, Josh, if you could pull up that graphic for me.
Here's the graph that Mariah just mentioned that shows the percentage of the behaviors that are causing in and out of school suspensions. As she mentioned, disruptive behavior is the highest and weapon is the lowest. Thus, from what she said, it shows that the policy is not targeting what it was meant to target originally.
Great, thank you, Josh. And during the 2007-2008 school year, the most common cause of expulsion and suspension on the national level, according to the U.S. Department of Education National Center for Statistics, was disruptive behavior. And just to kind of bring home the point about how unevenly zero tolerance is being applied, the rate of preschool expulsions is 3 times that of students K through 12. And that statistic is coming from the Advancement Project in 2010, titled "Test, Punish, and Push Out: How Zero Tolerance and High Stakes Testing Funnel Youth into the School to Prison Pipeline." And the breakdown I'm talking about, you can visually analyze on page 14. I'd also like to directly counter Ashley's point about special treatment. I'd love to give Ashley the chance to give her definition for special treatment. The definition that I've been working with is oh goodness gracious, sorry, forgive me. I'd love to give her the opportunity to define that in the way that she intends it. From my assessment, evaluating things on a case-by-case basis is not special treatment, but justice. And the operational definition I'm using for justice is the maintenance or administration of what is just by impartial adjustment of conflicting claims, or the assignment of merited awards or punishments. And I'm getting that in part from Merriam-Webster. It was a paraphrase. So yes, I'd love to give the floor back to Ashley. I open the floor.
Thank you. Yes, so I would define special treatment as any form of treatment that is given to one and not the other. So that's just what's taking place at this time, and it's not fair, and schools aren't allowing it in zero tolerance policies. So back to you, Mariah.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. So I maintain the assertion that what's going on with zero tolerance actually would be special treatment under that definition, because minority groups and groups from self-contained classrooms are being treated differently than others and unfairly. So de jure zero tolerance policy would be kind of across the board, if a contingency. If you bring a weapon to school, this is the consequence. But de facto, that's not what's happening. It's being used kind of almost as an avenue for racial bias and bias against those in self-contained classrooms. And it's being used to push heavier punishments than would have been tolerated before the Guns Free Schools Act. And I open the floor.
Ashley, do you have anything you would like to state?
Not at this point.
All right, Mariah, back to you.
Thank you. So now I'd like to talk about the first point made by Khan, and that's that zero tolerance is a well-documented school-to-prison pipeline. A graph that Josh is going to pull up for me is from that same Executive Office of the President Order, 2016. The visual breakdown's on page 3 for further analysis. I would like to say that the new administration has pulled down this report, but I do have a digital copy if anyone watching the debate would like to have it. And what you're going to see is kind of what we've been seeing continuously, that even though Caucasian children would hold the majority of population, they're not by far the majority that's getting arrested in school. And to give a little bit background before we pop that visual up, after the Columbine shooting, schools began having police officers on campus. So the line between school and law became very blurry. Many under-resourced schools actually began to rely on police rather than administrators to maintain discipline. And a growing number of districts started to employ these officers, so they would have teachers and police officers working with students. But the difference is if a teacher were to refer a student to the principal for problem behavior, a police officer would arrest a student, and now they're both equally in the school system. And they're entering the juvenile detention centers for the same minor crimes that they're getting suspended for. These are like loitering, noncompliance, disruptions. And as I said, a disproportionate amount of these students are African American or have developmental disabilities. So I bounce to you, Josh.
All right, and here shows the graph. It's titled Percentage of Distribution of Students Referred to Law Enforcement or Subjected to School-Related Arrest by Race and Ethnicity. And as Mariah mentioned, under the enrollment category, it shows that 50% are white, 16% are Black or African Americans, and 25% are Hispanic or Latino of any race. Now, the third graph, school-related arrest, it shows that only 33% of white Americans are arrested. A higher percentage of 34% are Black or African Americans, and then 25% is Hispanic or Latino of any race. Mariah, back to you.
Thank you, Josh. I open the floor.
Ashley, is there anything you would like to rebut?
Yes, a rebuttal to Mariah's comment on the juvenile detention center. I would like to note that juvenile detention is a behavior intervention that intends to reform criminals. The detention is intended to discourage undesired behavior and to keep them from reoccurring. The goal of juvenile detention systems is to help, not hurt, and reform, not punish. So children are treated as the children they are and not as adults. So I open the floor.
Mariah, do you have anything you'd like to say to that statement?
I do. Thank you, Josh. I'd like to say that in varying states, but where I'm from in Georgia, any students or children over the age of 16 are automatically tried as adults. So then we would end up out of the juvenile detention center and into adult correctional facilities. I'd also like to add that behavior interventions are not a part of the juvenile detention system, at least in my state. So you have limited access to school planning, and the population post-Columbine has grown exponentially by up to 2/3, and that's coming from 2016 Washington Post article. They're growing exponentially, but the resources made available to them have not. So as a behavioral intervention, it would not be appropriate for students. I open the floor.
Ashley, would you have any other comment to add to the argument, or would you like to make another point?
Yes, well, that's all I have for that one.
All right. Mariah, up to you.
Actually, I think it's Ashley's turn to make another point.
All right, Ashley.
Okay, that's right. You did speak about the demographics, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so when talking about those demographics, I just wanted to note that the prison population may be representative of those new demographics in the U.S. and not solely on discriminatory practices that Mariah spoke about. So when it comes to the demographics, the prison population includes ethnic groups as well as African Americans, Caucasians, and many others. The representative group may be that of African American descent, but it's important to know that the earth is more populated by African Americans, and the prison is just representative of the total US population. And now, Josh, if you would allow it, I would like to make another point for the pro side.
Go right ahead.
Great. Thank you. And so another point on zero tolerance is to be considered is that it's ethical because it is in compliance with the BACB's Ethical Code 2.05, Rights and Prerogatives of Clients. Students who are convicted or affected have the right to overturn their case in court. Courts will overturn when consistency does not equal rationality. For example, the Sill versus Morgan case. And this particular case occurred in the year 1996 when a student brought a friend to school. The friend was another student of the school, and the friend left a knife in the car. The owner of the car was unaware, but was still expelled from school. After the court saw this as unconstitutional, the student was re-enrolled to school. And now I'd like to open the floor.
Mariah, what do you have to say to the latest point?
Thank you. I would like to say that zero tolerance is not in compliance with the BACB's Ethical Code 1-01 or reliance on scientific knowledge. And that's because multiple studies cited here have shown that zero tolerance is not affecting the change as intended. And in fact, it is being used quite unequally and detrimentally to students. And I'd also like to say that it's not in compliance with the BACB's Code 2.09, which is treatment efficacy. As I said, we can really, we have evidence to support that it is not working. And as such, we can't ethically continue with this course of quote unquote treatment. And I open the floor.
Ashley?
Thank you. I do want to say that zero tolerance is in compliance with another code of the BACB's ethical code, and that's 2.0, and that is operate in the client's best interest. Zero tolerance is supported by science and provides a safer environment. This environment is especially important for those students with disabilities. Zero tolerance can stop the violence. Zero tolerance also discourages the antisocial behavior. And this concludes my final point for pro. So I would like to open the floor.
Mariah, up to you.
Thank you. I would like to comment on that, because the idea that courts will overturn mistakes that is not an ethical justification. Mistakes of this magnitude, which by mistakes I'm referring to unjust imprisonment of students for behaviors like loitering or disruptions. And these mistakes cost children their right to education, their social development, familial bonds, and freedom. Overturning these decisions does not restore what's been lost or broken, and the appeals process in general can take up to several years. So we're looking at if a hypothetical 16-year-old has disruptive behavior, maybe even an aggression, will allow for that, just single instance aggression. Then they're arrested by the school officer. They're sent through the juvenile system. In my state, they'd be tried as an adult. That might not be the case in all states. So sent to an adult correctional facility where they don't have access to educational services. They don't have access to behavior services. There's usually one psychologist per prison, and adult correctional facilities in Georgia have up to or over 500 inmates per facility. And the appeals process, let's say it takes 2 years. That's about average from what I've been able to find. So that 16-year-old is now an 18-year-old, did not graduate high school, and in general is in a much worse place. So even if that was overturned and they walked out as a free 18-year-old, they're much worse off than they would have been otherwise, which is against several BACB codes, 2-10, right to effective treatment. I'd also, if allowed, would like to make my final point as con.
Go right ahead, Mariah.
Thank you. So my final point is kind of switching gears a little bit, not much, that zero tolerance is against the BACB Ethical Code 4-10, avoiding harmful reinforcers. Now stay with me. Staying home can be reinforcing to some, and missing school is detrimental to the learning of students, especially those with special needs. And so the situation I'm kind of talking about is, let's say I'm a high school student, I have a disruption, and I get out of school suspension. So I get to go home, I get to spend a couple of days up to a week away from home, or away from school, excuse me, and then I come back to school. Well, now what if I don't find school reinforcing? If I would rather be away from school, then I can engage in that behavior again and receive the negative reinforcement of the removal of school and tasks. So that can create quite a cycle with students, especially more vulnerable students, like our students in self-contained classrooms who are asked to do some very difficult things. IEP goals can be difficult. They can be hard work. Even though all students go through hard work. So, escape would be really powerful option that we're really just giving them and allowing that to continue. I'd also like to say that zero tolerance is harsh and not just according to the operational definition that I stated before. And it goes against the behavioral science of ABA and psychology. Zero tolerance, as documented, does not solve the issues and doesn't change the behavior as intended. I'd also like to kind of elaborate on what I said before about it being an ethical violation of 2.10, the right to effective treatment. The prison system has increased significantly over the last 30 years. Programming in juvenile systems are overcrowded, and clients don't have access to meaningful programs. Like the services we provide, for example, ABA, in the state of Georgia is not available.
Ashley, do you have anything you would like to add to Mariah's statement?
I don't. I have no further comments. Were there any questions?
For starters, for you, Ashley, you stated that the policy is in compliance with the BACB's Compliance Ethics Code, does the policy, the zero tolerance policy, does it follow the ethics codes for other professions such as the teachers in the building, the school psychologist, social workers, any other professional entities in a school system?
Yes, I did say that. And my answer is yes. So we as future BCBAs are not the only professionals who have the client's best interest in mind. School counselors and educators are required to honor the best interests of students, and that includes their safety and the safety of others. These people and professionals are on the lookout for abuse, bullying, harassment, and other forms of violence. And if they notice this behavior from a student, it is their legal and ethical obligation to report the concern to the appropriate authorities. School counselors and educators are expected to adhere to the laws and policies of the school.
All right, thank you very much. And then I do have another question for you. Does the zero tolerance policy follow the least to most restrictive environment and setting that the BACB suggests for ABA therapy?
That one is more difficult. I just want it to be known that zero tolerance in the school system was implemented and placed into effect to keep the students safe and to keep the violence out, and also to provide a better learning environment. So when answering your question about following the least to most restrictive approach, the answer is no. So with zero tolerance policy, you break the rule, you face the consequence. There's no warning, there's no second chance.
And do you believe that that is correct for students with disabilities that may not understand the full consequence to their actions unless it's taught?
I think it is something that needs to be taught for them to understand it fully. But the rule's the same for all, so that's part of the zero tolerance policy.
All right. Mariah, a question to you.
Yes.
Can you please describe the process of when a student is either suspended or expelled, how the school to prison pipeline occurs? Because you mentioned in your debate that students who are affected by the zero tolerance policy will most likely end up in the prison system. Can you explain the timeline and how that typically occurs?
I would love to, thank you. So as I mentioned, police officers are becoming more and more a part of the school team, the team that handles disciplinary actions. So I'm gonna be a hypothetical high school, let's say I'm in a self-contained classroom, and I start disruptions. So you can say swiping, very loud vocalizations, enough that the teacher feels uncomfortable. So then the school resource officer would oftentimes come into those self-contained classrooms especially and attempt to contain. What I mean by contain can also oftentimes be restraints. The use of handcuffs has also been seen frequently in my state, in the state of Georgia. And then from that point, once the officer gets involved, then they would go through the it's called a referral process, but essentially through a booking process into juvenile detention, where they would get a court date and hearing, just like you would in the adult criminal justice program. And from that, a judge determines whether or not they need to be put in the correctional facility. Oftentimes, they are booked into a correctional facility. As Ashley mentioned, correctional facilities are seen as behavioral interventions. The perception is that when students are placed into this process for X amount of years, they are going to come out miraculously better than when they were put in, even though services, ABA services, the therapy services that my hypothetical self-contained classroom student was receiving are no longer available.
All right, thank you very much. That sheds some light on the whole debate. Do either of you have any other final points you would like to make?
That would depend. I apologize for the technical glitch, but how much of my final argument did you hear?
We were able to hear all the way until you stated that it is against the Ethics Code 4.10.
Okay, wonderful. With permission, I would like to finish my final point.
Go right ahead, Mariah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as I was saying, it's against Ethical Code 4-10, avoiding harmful reinforcers. So what's happening is a negative reinforcement cycle. Maintaining with my same example, I'm a self-contained classroom student. I have some disruptions, so I get suspended. Well, I like being suspended. I get to be home. I don't have to do work. So then when it's time for me to come back to school and I have demands again, I disrupt again. And then look at that. I get a longer break. And then eventually I would become expelled and have a great break, permanent break. So we're creating negative reinforcement cycles that are quite harmful to students because they're missing school, they're missing their therapy opportunities. With typically developing students, they're still missing the opportunity to learn. So that is quite socially significant. Zero tolerance is harsh, unjust, and goes against behavioral science of ABA and psychology. Zero tolerance does not solve the issues or change the behavior that it was originally intended to with the Gun Free Schools Act. Zero tolerance is also an ethical violation of 2.10, as I mentioned a little earlier, the right to effective treatment. The prison system has increased eightfold over the last 30 years, and programming in juvenile prison systems are overcrowded. They don't have the access to the same meaningful programs. So we're taking them from a place with potentially effective treatment, or for treatment for neurotypical children would be just education, and we're putting them in a system that no longer allows them to have treatment. So that would definitely be an ethical violation. And that was my final point.
All right, thank you very much. And then we do have one final question. So,
yes.
As stated, the zero tolerance policy either starts with suspension or expulsion because of a crime or a rule violation. And then, as you've mentioned, they are most likely to go to the prison system. Does this reinforce the idea for students that have disabilities? Are they falling even farther behind on the education system, or does it increase the behaviors that one may exude?
I would say a little bit of both, depending on what behaviors we're looking at. So as I said, in juvenile correction facilities, at least in my state I can speak to, students in the system are not getting proper education services. So there aren't in-person teachers. Some have the option to do kind of an online GED type system, but for all learners, that would not be appropriate. For a lot of self-contained classroom learners, that would not be an appropriate way to learn and test. So they would not be learning those behaviors or staying on track to graduate or meet their IEP goals. And at the same time, the prison system reinforces some other behaviors that would not be considered socially appropriate. For example, I mentioned the self-interest behavior in the student from Maryland. So there's other ways of it. You don't get a lot of attention when you're in a juvenile detention system. So a lot of problem behaviors can evoke attention that isn't easily evocable. So aggressions, self-interest behaviors, disruptions are all going to get that essentially guard attention. So did that answer your question appropriately?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. Do either of you have any last points you would like to make?
I have no further comments.
No
Right.
further points?
Thank you both very much. So, as moderator, to summarize the debate, First, we will go to Ashley. She presented on why zero tolerance policy is ethical. Some of the main points that she made were as follows. The zero tolerance policy allows documentation of proof that every student is being treated equally and the same way. 2, zero tolerance policy models what is like in the real world after school. For example, Ashley mentioned that if somebody is speeding and gets caught, then they receive a speeding ticket. Just like if you are late to work on a significant amount of times, then most likely the people would be fired. The third, the BACB finds that zero tolerance policy is in the best interest of the client and students of schools, thus it is ethically correct. Now, on the opposite side, Mariah pointed out why zero tolerance policies in schools is unethical. Some points she made were that the zero tolerance policy is a school to prison pipeline, which means that students are getting in trouble from the zero tolerance policy are most likely going to end up in the prison system once after school. 2, students are entering juvenile detention facilities for acts such as noncompliance and loitering, which in retrospect are small behaviors that in normal life would not need a behavior intervention plan and should not be focused on in such policies for either suspension or expulsion. Thirdly, she said that a disproportionate amount of these students are, in fact, African American or have developmental disabilities, which shows that it is discriminatory and it is not equal to all of the population. Now, to evaluate debate and find out which is the victor, I would have to go with Mariah. She pointed out that zero tolerance policies is not ethical on many different standpoints. It does not follow every single code given by the BACB, yet any other school authorities. And it is also a prison pipeline, which is not the best for students. Mariah, congratulations on the debate. Ashley, very good job as well. I hope the audience learned as much as they could from it. Thank you very much.